When Father Ingersoll hired me to teach English at Christ School, he told me I'd be teaching coming of age as part of the curriculum. Now, Christ School is an all-boys Episcopal boarding school, and here I am being tasked with guiding these 16-year-old boys through the transition into manhood when I wasn't even sure I'd come of age myself at 31. So I turned to the masters, Robert Bly, Joseph Campbell, Michael Meade, and created a curriculum around the journey of the epic hero. And we spent the year mapping the path that leads to becoming the hero of your own story. At the end of the year, the boys made plaster casts of their own faces and painted them to represent who they truly were inside. Many of them created warrior masks. They were powerful, like raw representations of the hero within. One still stands out in my memory. It was painted a burnished bronze with a single spot of gold on the forehead and a crown of turkey feathers. I wish I'd known then what I know now about the creative process and the allies of the soul and the psychic being. But if you wait until you know 100% of what you need to know, you'll never start. Even learning just 10% of how to create the life you actually came here to live will change everything. Welcome to Becoming You, where we apply spiritual principles and truth to your everyday life. If this is your first time joining us, thank you for being here. I'm Terry Hasty.
And I'm Haydn Hasty.
And just as a little background, particularly for those who don't know us yet, Haydn and I are married. We're best friends. We're co-conspirators. We're co-creators in our life's work. We, back in the day, taught at the same high school. We have 4 children together, his, mine, and ours. And we created a business that's fed us in every way for the past 32 years. And now we're committed to really being instruments in teaching you the truth about who you are and what you have come here to create. As we shared in last week's podcast, creation is indelibly wedded to endurance. And endurance is what strengthens and deepens the creative energy.
Absolutely, but there's a science to it. The outcomes of your life, as we discussed in the last episode, reside between 2 parameters: what you and your mind are capable of creating and what you and your heart are capable of enduring. In all these years of working with people, my experience has been that these themes are repeated and woven throughout everyone's life. So everyone encounters difficulties, therefore it must be part of the plan, part of the process, which we'll talk about. But not everyone is able to endure those difficulties with the same fortitude and positive outcomes as others, and there's reason why. There is rhyme and reason to the creative process, and most people really have no idea what it is, and that's what we're going to talk about in this conversation.
And before we dive in, Haydn, I wanted to just share from our own experience that when we started our business back in 1994, we were already deep in the endurance process. And, let's be honest, it wasn't because we were spiritually advanced or so highly tuned in. We just had no other choice. Sometimes life just corners you and there's no way out. There's no silver bullet and you just have to endure.
You said that very kindly. The endurance process, I can remember it was almost like feeling like we were just moving quickly to the end. So.
Well, we'd both gone through a divorce, which is, for any of you that have gone through that, of course, they all can be different, but it's a brutal breaking apart of your life in really every way. Emotionally, I think we were both incredibly tender when we came together. And I know some people looking out thought that we were completely crazy, but trusting you and trusting myself was really the most sane and profound thing I've ever done. We had absolutely no money. We had zero proof that we were ever going to get work or things were going to work out. We had those, that Oriental rug I thought was worth something that we took up there to the self-help credit union as collateral.
Right. Give me some money. I've got a great rug.
And some chairs, don't forget that. But, that's the exact kind of crucible where endurance and creation meet. It's that absolute necessity is really what fueled our creative energy, our willingness to create something out of nothing. And in that way, we were really lucky because the intensity was provided for us. So we created Mindspring out of nothing except our really true desire to teach at that time self-awareness and leadership to other teachers and teenagers, and we could not have even imagined where that would lead in all of the organizations across the country that we've had the privilege of being able to work with. But we didn't create it as much as it was created out of our willingness to keep showing up and to endure.
And it could be said that it created us, the
Absolutely.
work itself.
Yeah.
And being on mission and purpose was a very important part of that. In the last episode, we spoke in depth about the importance of enduring as well as the role of your soul and the psychic being to set a foundation for understanding the purpose of the times in our lives when we have to endure. And in this episode, we're going to that other parameter, and that is what you and your mind are capable of creating and focusing on the dynamic of creation. And that is a wonderful topic to discuss.
And I really appreciated some of the feedback we got from listeners that it was the purpose of that time in their lives they had to endure that was so helpful to them in last week's podcast. So let's pick up where we left off last week with the question of who is creating. Last week we said who is doing the enduring, who is creating, who is desiring an extraordinary life. So when my Christ School students and I were following the epic hero's journey, it was striking that not a single one of the main characters in those stories was excited to be the hero.
That's how it works.
Yeah, they all tried to get out of it because it's hard. It's scary. We all have that voice that says, "Why me? Why can't I just have an easy go of it? I just want to live my quiet little life and enjoy the fruits of my labor and enjoy the people I love." But in the midst of trying to hide out or resist, something always happens to bring the hero forward. And then the journey begins. So we have the ego and we have the soul or the hero. Which one is doing the creating? So the ego creates with the end result in mind, but the soul creates out of mission and purpose. Whereas the ego, like you just said, creates out of this place of scarcity or deficiency. It looks out there and says, what do I need to get so I can finally feel safe or successful or whole or accepted? It is reacting to a perceived lack of something. But the soul, it creates from abundance or from an overflow. It doesn't need the end result to be okay. It doesn't need anything for it to be itself. It already is itself. It creates because its very nature is to manifest the light that it already possesses, that it already is. It's the joy of the creative process. We've all had that experience. I know
Sure.
when our grandson Judson comes over, he'll say often, I just want to create something. So I have a candle kit at the house. I have all these paint things there. There is the joy of creation that we all experience.
Well, think of it this way: the ego is really a builder. It tries to construct a life that is comfortable, looks good from the outside, is noticed, is rewarded, like the mask that you were talking about that the boys created. But it's looking for a payoff. What's in it for me? How much money am I going to make? Am I going to get to travel if da 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 da? It's one thing after another. But the soul is seeking to express the psychic being the personality of the soul. It's not trying to get a result. It's trying to be a result. It's not about wanting, it's about becoming. It's about evolving. And that is a very different way of looking at the process of creation, a process that we have not really been trained up in.
It's so powerful, Haydn, everything that you just said, particularly that we're really not trained up in it. And that's why it was such a gift to me to teach that whole curriculum around the epic hero, because the epic hero is really not trying to defeat somebody else or divide or conquer in those stories. The epic hero is always on a quest of manifestation or of liberation. And that's really what we're all on as well, even though it's disguised sometimes as a quest for acquisition. It's really a quest for manifestation. And you can see these dynamics in the world today. Defeating, dividing, retaliating, those can all have short term outcomes, but ultimately just long term losses and a lot of anguish for us individually when we engage in that kind of thing.
Well, a good start in making this shift from our typical or traditional historical understanding of the process of creation is a shift from the ego to a higher part of yourself. And a really good place to begin is to, I know this sounds a little radical, but to remove words in your vocabulary like wish, want, need, and hope. You don't need them. They slow you down. They confuse your innate abilities to create. They cause you to delay, to take a passive stance in creating the life that you truly desire. And I could go in much deeper around that, but for the time being, wish, want, need, hope. We really shouldn't use those words because it establishes that what it is that we're seeking is not there.
And I can see eyebrows lifting and Hayden being with
What?
you all these years, 35 years now. I have been in resistance to some things you say because I'm like, that's not right. That's not true. But what you actually said to me and is very interesting. And I have to say, Hayden, I'm so happy and lucky to be with you because most every time that I go, what? That's not true. That's not right. I have to turn around and say, oh, actually, I think I agree with that now. You're starting to make sense to me, as I said early on. This whole need, want, wish, and hope, these are words that really are associated again with lack. Like, well, maybe I'll get it. Maybe it'll work out. I hope it does. They're associated, with the ego that's not really expecting things to go well, but hoping they will. So instead, maybe words to use to emphasize in our vocabulary would be like to choose, to know, or even dream that there's a certainty to our thinking with these words rather than this kind of wishy-washy hopefulness.
Well, let's go over, just as we did last time, let's go over some very essential concepts that help all of us, including you and me, increase our knowledge of how to create the life that we want or the work that you want to create. And the first concept is really the foundation, to me, around which the process and the art of creation rest. And that concept is this: you do not attract what you want, you attract what you are. Your everyday life is a mirror image of your inner state. And this understanding, this concept, I would suggest to anybody, it has no exception. It is absolutely true that you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. If you harbor resentment and rage that carries over through the years, this is what you attract. If you harbor love and acceptance, this is what you attract. The inner state is, the inner condition is like a magnet. Now, the mind is a magnet, and that's just one part of you, but so is the soul, so is the gravity and the magnetic attraction of the soul.
So recently, I was in a coaching session with a young woman, and it was fascinating. I actually shared this with her. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are, because she reached out to me because she's in a new relationship and she's had experiences in the past where she would hear herself being a little harsh or a little unkind. And I said, but what do you want? She said, I want connection. I want relationship. I want intimacy. But what's the fear? And she said, the fear is I'll get hurt if I get in relationship, if I have intimacy, if I'm close. And so what do we attract? Which one is in the driver's seat there? If I understand this correctly, what you're saying is it's not about whether I want this or that. It's the inner state of my being. If I'm coming at it from fear, then that's what I'm going to attract.
Well, it's uh,
But if
it's
I
it's very simple, and I've asked myself this question so many times when I was younger. Why does this keep happening to me? Because I keep doing it to me, and that doing comes from that inner state that attracts itself in your everyday life.
So just to reiterate that if I truly understood it, it's the inner state of being, the consciousness that I want to live in, that determines what I actually get.
That is absolutely true.
So this is concept number 2, and it is the greater perfection of my inner being results in greater perfection in my outer world. And when we were thinking about this podcast, Haydn, it reminded me of the John Mayer song, Waiting on the World to Change. So I jotted down a few lines from it. Me and all my friends, we're all waiting on the world to change. When the world keeps spinning off its hinges, deep within our hearts, we know we're only waiting on the world to change.
But those days of thinking this way and evolving this way
Just sitting tight until
are
things get
just
better.
essentially gone.
Yeah.
We are wiser and smarter than that because the world, once again, from the collective point of view, the world is a mirror image of the collective inner condition. So we have to begin inside, and there is no need to wait on that.
It really is shifting the reliance that we have on external elements like money and relationships, even health, awards, to recognize that my internal condition is really the determiner, the mandate for the experience of my life. So I can give an example here of that. I've been practicing daily by taking a few minutes to be quiet and to see all of us as one, to see all of it as one, everything that's happening, because I can get so upregulated by current events and things going on in the world. So I just take a few minutes to be quiet, and I include with love, I include Gaza and Israel, Iran, Ukraine, Canada, the United States, so on. And a person who on a daily basis I have deep resistance to. I didn't invite this person, but there he was. And I did feel a sense of relief from the agitation that I feel around this person, even after I came out of my quiet time. The truth is, even when chaos is prevalent and people around you are acting out of their own stuff, their own divisiveness, you're still the one creating your own cosmos. When you bring light to your inner cosmos, that light inevitably floods into your outer world. So perfecting your inner state of being is what allows the greater perfection of your outer world to start to take shape.
Well, that's the correct pivot and the correct poise of how to truly understand the process of creation. When you're standing in the middle of the circle, sending love to places experiencing intense conflict, and that person that you had resistance to suddenly appears, your ego immediately, reacts, as does everybody's.
Yeah.
The ego wants to
Like,
protect its own
how'd you get in
boundaries.
here?
Right. You have no right to be here. You haven't deserved, you haven't warranted my, acceptance. But by including them, you didn't change their behavior. You changed your relationship to them. And this helps us begin to, I refer to it as cosmosize our inner world, to create a balance and a harmony in our inner life. Most of us spend all of our time and energy trying to change the people and the circumstances around us. We think, well, if they'd stop acting like that, if they wouldn't be like this, I would certainly feel
If they
better.
were not here.
Well, notice that that's not true. You don't have to wait for the world to change because, to a certain extent, there is no world. It doesn't mean that the world is not real. It means what the world is doing is not what you think it is, and you do not have to wait on that. As a matter of fact, your well-being is not dependent upon the world. That's a very important part of understanding the process of creation.
And that is exactly why we created the Becoming You Journey online community. Every month, you engage with resources that we share on specific themes like creating and enduring. And then we come together live each month to share our questions and our revelations, our observations. You can learn more about the Becoming You journey on our website, truthspringasheville.com, if you'd like to become more engaged in exploring and becoming and evolving individually, but also as part of a community.
Well, let's keep this going. Let's move on to concept number 3, which is a different way of saying what we have already said. Whatever it is that you create or fail to create is the manifestation or the lack of manifestation of the inner condition, of the inner consciousness. So, this inner dynamic is really what is responsible for creating your life. It's not a marketing plan or money or networking, and not that these things can't be helpful, but they're not a substitute for this reality and understanding that lies inside of you. So look within, and that's the secret to beginning to understand how to create the life that you really desire. So let me repeat that again. Whatever it is that you create, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, or whatever it is you fail to create, is the manifestation or representation of, or a lack of representation of, your inner condition, of how your inner world is unfolding.
So creation comes from the inside out.
That's exactly how it works.
Well, to build on that, the next principle is really a necessity, and this is concept number 4. Sincerity is the key to creating the life you desire. Mind, body, emotion, and spirit all moving to the same goal. Align all parts of yourself to choose the path that you choose to be on. Train your mind, train your body, and your emotional framework that they have a job to do, that you have a plan, and that you are the one in charge.
Not them.
Not them. Decrease that kind of division in your inner being and increase the unity of all parts of yourself moving in a particular direction. So back to my earlier example of my goal to manifest unity in myself and therefore in the world, I admit I would not have willingly invited that undesirable person into that framework. But by excluding him, I am not being sincere in my effort. And I hope that makes sense. In aligning it, it's not always easy to unify mind, body, emotions, and spirit to the same goal or the same desire, but sincerity is the key. If I'm sincere in my desire to unify, I can override my desire to blame or exclude or justify blaming and excluding somebody.
Well,
And
don't expect perfection or 100%. It's
right.
okay. The mind is still going to react, and that's right. It's the effort of creating that path of sincerity.
Exactly. I mean, we are here to manifest, but it happens through practice, through time, through
Evolution.
space. Yeah, if you can't do it today, just try again tomorrow if you sincerely want it. Aspire to be that which you desire and be honest and sincere with yourself. I asked the woman that I was coaching, I said, how do you want to experience yourself? And I saw her jotting that down because she said driving home, she's often going through other scenarios of what's going to happen. And she said, instead of doing that, of doomsdaying it, I could just spend my energy, my time aligning my mind, body, emotion, and spirits to how I want to experience myself, regardless of the circumstances.
Well, that's consciousness at work. Consciousness essentially is knowledge and wisdom applied. That's essentially what it comes down to, but it is beyond the mind. And this has everything to do with creating that inner condition that allows you to really powerfully engage in the act of creation. And so let's keep moving. This is concept number 5, and it's a quote from A Course in Miracles. And the statement says, perception is the vehicle by which all ignorance is brought to knowledge. So, right now, as you're listening to this, even if you're driving, maybe you're on a plane, just look around. What do you see? As Rafiki says in Lion King, look harder.
Like, do you just see trees out your
Right.
window, or what do you really see?
Perception is not a fact, it is a choice. Your perception of anything is a choice of what you want yourself to be. So now, with that in mind, I'll ask you again, what do you see? Can you see the perfection unfolding? Because what you see out there is generated from what you see inside of yourself. Begin to train your mind to see beyond the senses, beyond your mind, but beyond the drama of everyday life. What do you see? Choose it consciously, see it consciously.
Because what I see in them, I'm strengthening in myself. I believe that's
Absolutely.
also from A Course in Miracles.
But I was in the office one day and I got a phone call from a man. I could tell by his voice it was an older man who had attended a little speech I had given several weeks before at University of North Carolina at Asheville. I've been asked to go over there and speak about it. I think it was entrepreneurship or something, and had a lot of fun. But the gentleman called me up and said that he had attended that and he wanted to speak to me. Well, my first reaction was, okay, this is business. He's going to bring us business. So we arranged lunch, and this guy pulls up in front of the office. He's in this old Cadillac, and if I remember correctly, I would have guessed at the time he was probably at least 70, 75 years old. And we go have lunch, and I'm just waiting for the big moment when he wants to talk about using our services, but that's not what he does. And he says to me, he says, well, Hayden, he said, I remember in the speech that you gave, you spoke about having your own building and your own campus. And I would like to see a picture of that. And I said, I'm thinking, where's this going? I said, well, actually, I said, where you picked me up, I said, that's where we are currently working. I said, we rent that space. I said, but I don't have a new building or a campus. He said, I understand that. He said, but you said that was what you wanted. And I said, yes, that is correct. And he said, well, show me a picture of it. Well, I'm thinking, this old man is senile. He does, I'm not uncomfortable, but I'm going, how can I get out of this? And so I said something like, I probably didn't explain myself well enough. Where you picked me up, that's where our building is. And he said, Hayden, I don't think you understand what I'm asking you. And so we started talking, and all of a sudden, this is what he said to me. He said, Hayden, he said, until the time comes that you can show me a picture, a drawing of what you're dreaming about, he said, son, you're just talking. And it didn't upset me because I realized he's not coming after me. He's not criticizing me. He's not making fun of me, but he is holding me accountable. And I really enjoyed that. And I said to him, I said, I understand. And so we came back, and I was getting ready to get out of the car. And he said, Hayden, he said, next time I call you up to take you out to lunch, he said, I expect to see that drawing. And I said, yes, sir. I said, you got it. And how long after that was it that we moved into our first
I
part
don't
of the
know.
campus?
But I remember seeing that little drawing you did up on the bulletin board, and I'm like, "What's that?" And you
Let's get to
said,
work, you know. So we all need help, and the reason I bring that up is that I'm no different than anybody else. I have grown up in this and continue to grow up in it and keep learning about it. And how much, of course, I never saw him again. He never called me again, but it was the stimulus to get out of wishing and wanting and hoping and moving into taking action, because what I was beginning to get in touch with was not this ego desire, but this longing of how to express what I felt like was inside of me.
and that's such a great example of what happens to the epic hero when the hero or heroine decides to embark on the journey. Is the allies show up, and he was one of many
Yes,
that
he was
started bringing our
one of many.
dream felt more real just because you had a little pencil sketch of it up on the bulletin board. So before we move on to concept 6, this would be a good time to just think for a minute about how we usually create. We probably spend a lot more time thinking about it, and that's okay, than we actually spend doing it in the beginning. We obsess over the result, we focus on the money or the weight loss or the affirmation or the win, but you notice that the energy around that kind of focus is tight. It's anxious because if we're going to win, of course, there's the option of failing. And when we create for a result, we're at the mercy of a timetable that we don't really control. You asked me how long it was between your lunch with him and us buying this building. I don't really remember that because the timetable is often out of our control. It maybe doesn't happen exactly when you want it to. It's kind of the trap of hope. We hope it works out, but the moment the result is delayed, hope evaporates, our mind wanders, and we give up. But having that tangible drawing was incredibly helpful. The ego's like that horse that walks in a circle, but there's a carrot out in front of it. And that's why it keeps walking, trying to get the carrot it can never quite reach. But without the carrot, there's no motivation. And that brings us to the shift. Concept number 6 is instead of focusing on the carrot, on the results, serve as an instrument of the work. And look at what happens to your energy when you make that shift. And I'm sure you've had that experience in your life where it wasn't about the result, it was about the purpose of the work, the joy of the work. The anxiety of will I ever get there transforms into this kind of sacred pressure to see that the work is done well. So you're no longer working for a payout, you're working for a purpose. And here we're moving away from that lower egoic desire nature of the emotional body, which is always based on scarcity and fear and inadequacy, and anchoring into the higher dynamic of your psychic being
the
or
soul.
the soul, that part of you that is unthreatenable, unfailable.
But this poise changes your relationship with time itself. When you're an instrument of the work, a setback isn't a sign to quit, it's a sign to get focused.
Mm-hmm.
Even emotions like anger are transformed. Instead of a destructive outburst, the energy. Actually, anger can be a very healthy, positive mechanism. It is a supporting of, a guarding of the mission and purpose of the work itself. So the obstacle is simply a tool to become more focused.
It can create a surge of kind of courage. I remember when we bought the building or we were about to close on it, and you all of a sudden move into this deep fear of the financial commitment we were making to buy our own building.
I wanted to bail out.
You wanted to bail out because you said, I can't go back to being so poor again and not being worried about how we're going to make it month to month. But then it did create this courage to move forward, that this is what everything's working out, everything's lining up. And again, we had allies helping us,
Well,
in that
that had a
process.
lot to do with you and you essentially confronting me. And you were kind, but you said, why are you doing this? Why do you feel this way? And I mean, it was deep. I said,
Hmm.
because I'm afraid. Because what if we fail? I won't make it out of having to go back and being poor again. And yet at the same time, the only way I'm going to avoid repeating that is having the courage to take a risk
Yeah.
and to make a change. And you were the one that kind of pushed me over the edge and
Well,
said, okay, just shut up. We're going to do this. Everything's going to be okay.
that's why we make a good team.
Yeah.
Well, the ego's always wanting to chicken out. I think it's like the workhorse just wants to be done so it can rest. The instrument wants to be utilized so the soul can express itself. So, which one are you? Are you the workhorse or are you the instrument? You're no longer just waiting for a payout. As we said before, you're working for a deeper purpose.
So, if you want to get a hands on experience in working with how to apply these concepts in your everyday life, we are hosting the Becoming You, the Path to Consciousness retreat at the Omega Institute this summer up in Rhinebeck, New York, July 31st through August 2nd. It's a place where you can step away from the noise and the busyness of your everyday life and actually take some time to really engage and have some really high level time to look more carefully at these ideas that we are discussing.
And we would love to see you there and have time with you. You can find out more about it and register at our website, truthspringasheville.com.
You know, there are thousands of stories of people who embody this shift that we're talking about, but there are also those that really stand out. And one of those is the man that is behind the Crazy Horse Memorial out in South Dakota. His name was Korczak Zilokowski. He was born in 1902, but he was orphaned. He became an orphan not long after that, and he grew up in a kind of a long trail of difficult foster homes. He didn't have any formal art training. He taught himself to carve by working as an apprentice in a shipyard and making fine furniture. But in 1939, he worked briefly, a very short period of time, as an assistant to the gentleman, Mr. Who was in charge of Mount Rushmore. But both of them together, they were two really strong willed individuals. There's even the story that they may have gotten in a fist fight, and Korczak was fired only after 19 days on the job. But that same year that he was fired, now here's this issue of the inner being making its way out into the outer world. That same year, the Lakota chief Henry Standing Bear wrote a letter to him. And this is one of those famous lines that was remembered. He said, "My fellow chiefs and I would like the white man to know the red man has great heroes also." And so, after serving in World War II, where he was wounded at Omaha Beach, he accepted the challenge. And he arrived in South Dakota in 1947 with $174 to his name. And for the next 35 years, he worked largely alone, refused to accept any government funding so they could basically avoid any kind of control coming into the project. And he lived in a log cabin at the base of the mountain until his death at the age of 74. He was buried in a tomb that he had blasted out of the rock there.
That's amazing.
In his epitaph, which he cut into a steel plate himself, it reads, Korczak, storyteller in stone, may his remains be left unknown. Well, of course,
And that's commitment.
the project didn't die with him. His wife, Ruth, picked up the work, and she was director of the memorial. She died in 2014. But the work is carried on today by their children and grandchildren through the Crazy Horse Memorial Foundation. And the children, everyone involved in it today, follow the detailed scale models and books that Corsac left behind to ensure that the mountain and the Crazy Horse Memorial is finished exactly as he envisioned it. The project is still private, but it's funded entirely by admission fees and donations, which is why the progress is still going to take decades to complete.
When we visited the Crazy Horse Monument, it was so incredible to consider the vision, I said commitment, the dedication that has to be intact to have that kind of perseverance. I mean, part of me thought, just take the funding, like get the project done, get the scaffolding down. It's already magnificent. I didn't completely understand it then, but now I really see clearly it was not about finishing it. It was about the integrity of the project that the sculptor just wouldn't compromise. And even now, his family has refused to compromise all these years later.
Well, even today, after all these years, there's still no official completion date. There are a number of people who have suggested that it's going to take another 50 to 100 years to complete. And that's part of the secret. It's not about finishing. It's about consciously participating. It's about the courage to start a work so big that you won't even be alive to see the end of it. And Durkheim, in his book, The Way of Transformation, said, and it has everything to do with people like Corsac, he said, the goal of the exercise is not to improve the skill, but to transform the person performing it. And this is one of the secrets, to turn your work, however small or noble it may be, into the yoga of your life, of participating in the science of the process of creation that comes from the inside of your being.
So, this is a good time to ask again, who is creating? Who is doing the yearning? So, Hayden, let's go back over the 6 principles just to kind of put them in stone, so to speak, and our listeners can remember them. Number 1, you don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. Your everyday life is a mirror image of your inner state, and there is no exception to this. Number 2, greater perfection of my inner being results in greater perfection of my outer world. Number 3, whatever it is that you create or fail to create is the manifestation or lack of manifestation of your inner consciousness. Number 4, sincerity is the key to creating the life and work you desire. And number 5, perception is the vehicle by which all ignorance is brought to knowledge. And number 6, the last one we've included here, instead of focusing on the results, serve as an instrument of the work.
And this is not meant to be a comprehensive list. It's not a linear arrangement of principles of the art of creation like the 7 habits of successful people. But we're sharing it with you to help you create a mental poise, a posture, an elevated perception of how the art of creation in your simple everyday life works. But I do want to add an additional comment here, and it's an advanced understanding of the art of creation. But this quote comes from a man, his name was Bernard Inchanger. He was French. He would become known as Satprem, and this is what he said. He said, now remember, I said this is really kind of an advanced understanding, but it's also something that you will recognize you have already experienced in your life. And he says, a man starts to be only when he arrives at the total nothingness of what he is. Now, where does this come from? What allowed him to make this statement? He was born in Paris in 1923. By the time he was 20 years old, so that's 1943, he was a member of the French resistance in World War II. He was arrested by the Gestapo in Bordeaux in that year, 1943, and he was held and tortured at the very famous Fresnes prison in Paris for several months, where he was then deported to the Buchenwald concentration camp. And as the Allies were advancing following the invasion, he was transferred to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, where he would be liberated in 1945. Following his release from the concentration camp, he found his way to Pondicherry, India, not as a spiritual quest, but really it was just a result of a job. And it was there that he met the mother and Sri Aurobindo, and he would go on to write a number of books, the most notable one being Sri Aurobindo, or The Adventure of Consciousness. And for those, any of you that are interested, I've included a Word document with all of my notes from that book that you can download, and it's just tremendous. Now, the reason I'm discussing this is that often in the process of creation, your ego, your personality must fail or be absolutely broken through crisis or suffering for the deeper creative force to finally break through. And I am suggesting that in this sense, most of us know and do understand this statement that he's making, that the process of creation often begins with a process of destruction of the old self. So, my intention in sharing this is that if you want to stay the same, there's no judgment of that, but you're fighting the very evolutionary forces that are driving your life, which is you are here to evolve. There is a destiny that your soul has come with into birth. And if you don't accept that, if you don't understand that, if you don't learn to consciously participate in that, it's perfectly okay. There is no judgment. But you will learn through pain and suffering. On the other hand, you can choose to learn through conscious growth and expansion by aligning yourself as best you can with your work and using the work to transform your life forever. And yeah, there are going to be problems and difficulties with that, but there are going to be healthy, very positive barriers that will help you transform your life. And this is one of the greatest acts of creation in which you'll ever engage. But that is up to you.
So if we said that quote again, Haydn, I think it may resonate with people more after hearing that story about Satprem and his life.
A man starts to be only when he arrives at the total nothingness of what he is, which is what Satprem experienced in the concentration camps. It was all destroyed. So what is left? It's very common for people who have engaged in meditation for a long time, where they make contact with what is sometimes referred to as the void or the nothingness. But that is only a transition into the experience of the reality of the truth of who and what you are. And that, of course, also happened to Bernard, to Satprem, and how it went about the business of transforming his life. So it's an advanced understanding. But I'm suggesting that everybody has experienced that at some level. You didn't necessarily have to be in a concentration camp to experience that, but you've been through difficulties in your life in which parts of yourself were taken to task
or burned away.
And even burned away. You had no choice. You had to let go of those old parts of yourself. So between those two parameters, what you and your mind are capable of creating and what you and your heart are capable of enduring, your life unfolds. It's not about finishing, it's about starting. It's about consciously participating in the process of seeking to fulfill your dreams and your deepest longings. What are you good at? What is
Mhm.
it that floats your boat, that causes your heart to soar, that causes time literally to stop when you're in the middle of doing it? What happens, happens. You can't control all of that. But the question is, when will you start?
And again, we've asked you in the last episode who is enduring. Um, and now we can ask you again who is creating. And when you talked about Haydn, what floats your boat, what melts your butter, that's the yearning. What are you yearning for? What do you want? What do you truly want more of in your life? You're not who you think you are. You're so much more. The greatest safety, if not the only safety you possess, is within you. When everything else is burned away, it's within everyone. It's the truth of who you are, that spark of the divine in the physical body, in the material, journeying through time and space, lifetime after lifetime, just seeking to realize this truth, which is the only safety and the only liberation that we experience. They're the muscles of the physical body, but they're also the muscles of spiritual knowledge. And each of us can learn to create really an extraordinary life. And it doesn't take money, it doesn't take resources. It's this certainty that whatever it is that thought suggests to you, whatever your dreams reveal to you, you can become, you can realize. And the veil between you and God begins then to thin. We want to thank you so much for your time and consider downloading Haydn's Word document. It contains his notes from Satprem's book, Sri Aurobindo, or The Adventure of Consciousness.
I want to say this about Corsac, going back to him. He didn't need credit for his work, didn't want it. He didn't care about fireworks and his picture in the paper. The soul doesn't need credit or fame. The reward is the joy of the unfolding. And yet, when you live and you work from your center, you end up creating a legacy that has a greater impact, influence than you ever could have imagined. Funny how it works.
And when we do work from our center, the allies, the friends, the guides show up. You're not alone.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being with us today as we work together to create a more conscious world.
Take care, and we'll see you next week.